The man on the phone was telling me I was special, not in those words. Men like Curtis Vane never used a small word when a large one would do. He called me a Diamond Legacy member. He said it slowly, the way you unwrap something expensive, and then he waited for me to be grateful. So I was grateful. I told him it meant the world. I told him my husband would have been so proud. And while I said it, I wrote a single number in the margin of the leather folder open on my kitchen table. A number that did not match the number Curtis had just read me out loud. Off by $412. A small thing. A dollar that didn't balance. I had spent 31 years chasing dollars that didn't balance. Curtis didn't know that. To Curtis, I was exactly what their list said I was. A widow, 68 years old, a paid-off house, a husband 3 months in the ground, and a head gone soft with grief. The easiest money he would see all year. He thought he had found his best customer. He had. He just had the word best pointed the wrong way. I am going to tell you how a grieving woman became the favorite client of the people who robbed her dying husband. And I am going to tell you why that was the worst mistake they ever made. I will tell you about the folder, and the $412, and the morning 3 men finally understood who they had let into their books. But to tell it honestly, I have to take you back to the worst week of my life. Before any of it was a plan. Before it was anything at all but a phone ringing in a house where a good man was trying not to die. His name was Ray. We were married 44 years. He built things with his hands. Cabinets, mostly, and the kind of staircases people don't make anymore. The ones that curve like they grew that way. He had sawdust in the creases of his knuckles for most of his life, and he smelled like cedar and coffee, and when he laughed the whole room turned toward him without deciding to. I was the careful one. He was the warm one. For 44 years, that was the whole arrangement, and it worked. I was a forensic accountant. People hear that and picture a calculator with a pulse. What it really meant was this. When a company lost money and didn't know how, when the numbers said one thing and the truth said another, they called me. I was the woman they brought in at the end, after the easy answers ran out. My whole working life was learning how lies behave inside a ledger. Lies are tidy. That's the tell. Real money is messy. It bounces and rounds and forgets itself. A lie balances too well, right up until it doesn't. And then there is always one figure, one stubborn dollar that won't sit down. I caught liars for a living, and I was good at it. I want you to hold on to that. Because of everything that happened, it's the part I still can't forgive myself for. In the spring, Ray got the diagnosis. Pancreatic, they told us in months, not years. And they were right, the way doctors are right about the worst things. He took it better than I did. That was Ray. But there was one thing that scared him, and it wasn't the dying. He told me once, near the start, sitting on the edge of our bed, with his hands hanging between his knees. He said, "I'm not afraid to go, Maggie. I'm afraid to leave you with less." He had carried us his whole life with those hands, and the idea of leaving me to do the math alone frightened him more than any machine in any hospital. I should have heard it. A man that frightened about money is a man waiting for someone to promise him peace. Someone did. The first call came on an ordinary Tuesday. A woman named Diane. Warm voice, the kind that sounds like it's smiling. She said she was an account coordinator with a firm called West Haven Legacy Group, and she was reaching out to families facing a serious diagnosis. Families who wanted to make sure the well spouse was protected. She was sorry to hear about Ray. She wondered if she could just send some information. No pressure. A few days later, a card arrived, handwritten, asking how he was feeling. Then another. Diane remembered things. She asked about his cabinets. She asked if I was sleeping. You have to understand how that lands in a house where everyone else has started talking about you in the past tense. The hospice nurse was kind, but she was counting days. The lawyer was kind, but he kept saying when the time comes. And here was this warm voice that talked about after, and protected, and made plans like the future was a real place we still got to live in. Ray, who had never kept a thing from me in 44 years, started keeping this. I know why now. He wasn't hiding it because it was shameful. He was hiding it because it was a gift. He wanted to hand it to me finished, wrapped, done. He wanted to die knowing he had walked into the dark first and left a light on for me. The man who came to wrap that gift was Curtis Vane. He called himself a senior legacy advisor. He came to the house twice. I was at the pharmacy the first time and only home for the tail of the second, so what I knew of Curtis, at first, I knew through Ray's face. And Ray's face, those weeks, did not light up for much. But it lit up for Curtis. I want to be fair about this, because being fair is the only way to make you understand. Curtis was good at his job, and his job in those rooms looked exactly like kindness. He brought Ray coffee the way Ray took it, black with 1 sugar, and he remembered it the second time without asking. He let Ray talk about the staircase he built for the church, the one that took him a whole winter. He laughed in the right places. He never looked at his watch. For a dying man who had started to feel like a problem other people were managing, Curtis felt like the last person on earth who saw him as a man instead of a countdown. That was the product. The coffee was the product. The listening was the product. The investment was just the invoice. The thing Curtis sold was called a family legacy trust, guaranteed income for the surviving spouse. A protected, tax-advantaged vehicle, he said, available only to families who qualified. And Ray qualified because of his health, which was a sentence designed to make a dying man feel chosen instead of doomed. There was a window. There was always a window. The health-qualified rate would close. The good ones go fast. Move now, while we can still lock it in for her. And Ray moved. He cashed a certificate of deposit we'd held for 19 years. He took the surrender on a small policy. He borrowed against the big one. Over the last months of his life, in pieces, so I wouldn't see it all at once, my husband sent $80,000 to West Haven Legacy Group. They gave him something for it. They gave him the folder. It was a beautiful thing, I'll give them that. Oxblood leather, a gold crest stamped on the front, heavy in the hand like it meant something. Inside, on thick cream paper, were statements. West Haven Legacy Group. Account holder Raymond, A growing balance. Projected monthly income for the surviving spouse. Little charts that climbed. Every few weeks a new page arrived in the mail to be slid into the sleeve, and Ray slid each one in himself, even when his hands had started to shake, and he kept the folder on his nightstand, where a man keeps the thing he is proudest of. He showed it to me once, near the end. He was so tired by then, but he pulled it into his lap and opened it, and he said, "I took care of you. Look, you're going to be okay. I'm not leaving you with less." And I looked, and I saw a number climbing, and I saw my husband's whole heart sitting in his lap in a leather folder, and I did not look closely. I want you to hear that. Because it's the truth, and it's the worst thing I did. I, who looked closely at strangers' money for 31 years, did not look closely at this. I was watching him breathe. I was counting a different kind of days. I closed the folder, and I told him thank you, and I meant thank you for loving me. And I let him have his gift. Ray died on a Thursday morning, with the window open because he liked the air. The folder stayed on the nightstand. I couldn't move it. For days I couldn't move anything of his, the reading glasses, the water glass, the folder, because to move them was to admit the room was just a room now. 3 days after we buried him, the phone rang. It was Diane. That warm voice. She said, "Mrs. Brandt, first, our very deepest condolences. We're all just heartbroken here." And then, without a breath between, without even the second of silence a person leaves for the dead, she said, "Ray was so proud of the legacy he built for you. We'd love to help you continue it." 3 days. They hadn't paused. To them, his death wasn't a loss. It was an event in a calendar. It was the moment the account changed hands from the man who was dying to the woman who was grieving. And the woman who was grieving was, by every figure on their list, the better mark. Softer, sadder, sitting on a house and an insurance check and a head full of fog. I told Diane I'd need a little time. She said, of course, take all the time you need. And then she said she'd call Thursday, which was not all the time I needed. I hung up and I sat in Ray's chair, and for the first time since the diagnosis, the fog lifted all the way off, and the careful woman I used to be opened her eyes. I went and got the folder, and this time I read it the way I used to read them. Cold, line by line, looking for the dollar that wouldn't sit down. It took about 9 minutes. The statements were beautiful, and they were empty. There was no fund. The income projections didn't compound. They were just drawn, a hand-fed curve that climbed because someone typed bigger numbers each month. The account number had the right number of digits and meant nothing. The guaranteed monthly income for the surviving spouse routed to no instrument that exists. There were transfers out, $80,000 of them, every one of them real money, out of our real accounts. And there was nothing on the other side of the ledger but stagecraft. A lie that balanced too well, printed on cream paper, kept on my husband's nightstand like a prayer. I understood it all then. I want to take a moment with it, because the understanding is the part that broke me, not the loss. They had not sold Ray a bad investment. A bad investment is a thing that exists and fails. They had sold him nothing at all, and they had charged him $80,000 for it in the last months of a life he should have spent resting. And they had taken the most expensive thing in the room, and it wasn't the money, it was this. Ray was a man whose single greatest fear was leaving me unprotected. They had found that fear the way you find a splinter, and they had pressed on it for profit. They didn't steal his savings. They steered his love. They took the best thing about my husband, the thing that made the whole room turn toward him for 44 years, and they turned it into a faucet. And then I found his note. It was tucked in the back sleeve of the folder, behind the last fake statement. His handwriting, gone shaky at the end, but his. It said, for Maggie. So you're never afraid about money. Love, your Ray. That's when I cried. Not at the fraud. I didn't cry at the fraud. I cried because he died believing it. He died with that fear quiet for the first time, soothed by a lie, proud of a gift that was air. He went into the dark thinking he'd left the light on for me. He never knew. That mercy, at least, they couldn't take, because he was already gone. But I knew, and I was going to be the one to carry the truth of it now, the way I had carried everything careful in our marriage, while he carried everything warm. Now here is where most people picture me calling the police, and I did call them, but not the way you think, and not to do what you think. I made an appointment, and I sat across from people who do this for a living, and the first thing I learned is that I'd been carrying a small fortune of evidence without knowing it. Those statements that came every few weeks? West Haven had mailed paper across a state line, over and over, to sell a thing that didn't exist. There's a name for that. It's mail fraud, and it has its own federal investigators, the postal inspectors, and they get very quiet and very interested when you put a stack of mailed lies on the table. The wires Ray sent were wire fraud, and because the victim was old and sick, the law counts that against the people who did it. Hard, when the day comes. But here is the thing they told me gently, that I already half knew. An operation like West Haven is a tent. You hand them a folder, they fold the tent, and by Monday it's standing in another field under another name, and the man at the top, the one whose name is on no page, is never in the room when it falls. To catch the tent, you have to catch it standing. You need the real accounts, where the money actually lands. You need the man at the top to come out of his office, and you need to move at the one moment money is in motion, because there is a narrow window right after a transfer where the people I was sitting with can reach into a receiving bank and freeze fraudulent funds before they vanish for good. Most victims learn that window exists days too late after the money's gone and cold. I was not going to learn it too late. I was going to pick the day. I was going to pick the hour. And I was going to do it with these people standing behind me the whole way. Not alone, never alone, but from the one position they could never get on their own. From the inside, as a customer. So when Diane called that Thursday, I was ready. I was soft. I was foggy. I let my voice do the thing grief does to a voice. And I told her that Ray had always handled the money, and that I was so lost, and that I just wanted to honor what he'd started. I could hear her lean in. I could hear the smile come back. I had spent 31 years listening for the exact tone a person makes when they think they've found an easy number, and Diane made it, right into my dead husband's phone. It started small, the way a real frightened widow would. A modest amount to honor Ray's plan. I asked Diane 100 soft, foolish questions, and I wrote down every answer. I asked them to keep mailing me the paper statements, please, because Ray had loved the paper ones, and they were so happy to oblige, and every envelope that crossed the state line was another brick I was stacking on their heads, and they paid for the stamps. And I let myself grow. That was the bait. A frightened widow who keeps saying yes is the most exciting thing that can happen to a desk like that. I let it slip that the house was paid off. I let it slip there was more insurance than I'd realized. I let myself become, slowly in their books, a whale. And I watched how they treat a whale. Diane's calls got more frequent. Curtis came back onto the line, warm as ever, calling me dear. I want to stop here, because this is the part where it almost came apart, and I'd be lying if I made myself sound like I was never afraid. About 2 months in, Curtis tested me. Just once. In the middle of a friendly call, his voice changed, just slightly, and he asked, real casual, "What is it you did for work before you retired, Margaret?" And the whole room went cold, because the truth was a lit match. If I said forensic accountant, the tent would fold that night, and raise 80,000 and everyone else's would scatter to the wind. So I laughed the small, embarrassed laugh of a woman who never understood the bank statements, and I said, "Oh, nothing like that. I taught piano." 40 years of fingers on keys. I held my breath, and Curtis, who could read fear and softness like a sommelier, heard exactly the woman he wanted to hear. He chuckled and moved on. I sat there afterward with my hand flat on the table, steadying it, and I thought, all right. Not nothing like that. Exactly like that. You just don't know it yet. There was a man above all of them. I'd felt his shape for weeks, the way you feel a thing in a ledger before you can name it. Decisions came down from somewhere. Curtis would say, "Let me run it past the desk." The desk. I wanted the desk, and then Diane gave him to me, though I don't think she meant to. Or maybe she did. An envelope came one week with no statement in it. Just one sheet of paper that should never have left that office. An internal page. A working sheet with initials and amounts that weren't dressed up for any client, and a name at the top of the column they all answered to. It corroborated everything. It handed the investigators a thread they could pull, and it could only have come from one desk, from one frightened woman who, for one moment, did the bravest thing a person in her position can do, which is risk herself for a stranger. I never said a word about it on a call. But I knew what it cost her to drop that in a mailbox. I put that page in my own ledger, the real one, the one where every figure tells the truth, and I made a different kind of note next to Diane's name, than I made next to the rest. The name at the top of that column was Garrett Pell, and greed brought Garrett Pell out into the open, exactly the way I'd planned it with the people standing behind me. When I finally signaled the big one, the real one, every dollar Ray left, wired in a single lump to lock in some once-in-a-lifetime legacy rate that Curtis invented on the spot, the account got handed up. Curtis told me, with real reverence, that the founder himself wanted to personally oversee a client of my caliber. The whale had grown too big for the little fish. The owner came out of his office to land it himself. That was the mistake. It was always going to be the mistake. You cannot run a trap like theirs without believing everyone softer than you is food. I let them keep believing it, all the way to the end. I was the softest-looking thing they had ever seen. A piano teacher. A widow. A fortune sitting on a paid-off house. And I had given the investigators what almost no victim can give them. Not a story. A case. Names, dates, recordings, a stack of mailed lies, a real internal page, the receiving accounts they'd handed me themselves, and a date and an hour when the founder of the whole operation would personally be on the phone, in his own voice, on a recorded line, walking a widow through wiring him her husband's life. We said it. A Tuesday. 10 in the morning. The reason for the hour was simple, and it had nothing to do with collecting anything I already had. It was so that 3 things would happen in the same handful of minutes. Garrett Pell would say the crime out loud, in his own words. A real transfer would move, which would open the freeze window the moment it did. And the people standing behind me would be standing in the right places, at the right doors, exactly when it counted. This is the part Curtis and Garrett Pell remember differently than I do. The call began like a celebration. Diane first, warm, telling me what a beautiful thing I was doing for Ray. I will tell you, her voice was not quite as warm as it used to be. It had a crack in it now, and I think we both knew why. Then Curtis, calling me dear, telling me Ray was smiling down. Then a new voice, smooth and unhurried and pleased with itself. Garrett Pell. The desk. The founder, personally honored. He walked me through it like a man landing a marlin he can already see on his wall. The amount. The account. He confirmed it all in his own voice. Every promise about money that did not exist. While 3 states away people who do this for a living wrote down each word. Pell said, "And you're initiating the wire now, Margaret?" And I initiated the wire. A real one. A coordinated one, moving exactly when we had agreed it would move, with people positioned to do, in the next breath, the one thing most victims never get to do in time. Then I said, before he could enjoy it, "Curtis, are you still there?" He said, "Of course, dear." I said, "I want you to do one thing for me, before you can't anymore. Say my husband's name. You've talked to me for months. You've said the word legacy 500 times. Your legacy. The family legacy. His beautiful legacy. You sold him a folder and a fund, and you took $80,000 in the months he was dying. And in all that time, you never once said his name. Not one time. Because he was never a man to you. He was a balance. Say his name now." There was a silence I had waited months for. He didn't say it. He couldn't. I could hear him not knowing it. And then I heard, faint, on Garrett Pell's end of the line, a sound that does not belong on a sales call. A knock. Not a polite one, the kind with a lot of hands behind it, and a lot of words you have to say at a door when you can open it yourself or watch it get opened for you. I'd timed it close. I told you I would. Pell's line went strange. And then a voice that wasn't smooth at all said something I won't repeat. And then it was gone. And Curtis was still on with me for one more second, and I will remember that second the rest of my life. Because that warm, watch, never-looking voice finally cracked all the way through, and what came out of the crack was just a small, frightened man, saying, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Maggie. I'm the dollar that wouldn't balance." And I hung up the phone, and I sat in Ray's chair, in the quiet, and I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt like a woman who had finally finished a very long job. I felt the particular tiredness of the truth, told all the way through, for the man who deserved it. Here is what happened to them. Because I know you want to know. And because they each earned theirs alone. The wire I sent moved into a receiving account that was frozen before the money could be swept offshore the way the whole machine was built to sweep it. And because they froze it standing, while the tent was up, the funds already sitting in those accounts were caught too. Mine, and a great deal of money that was never mine. Far more than mine. Belonging to people I'd never met. The freeze landed in the window. The window was open because I chose the minute it opened. Garrett Pell, the founder, the desk, the man whose name was never on a single page, found his name on a great many pages after that. His own voice, on a recorded line, confirming a fraud to a widow, minute by minute, is not a thing a smooth man can smooth over. Mail fraud and wire fraud are not gentle laws, and they are far less gentle when the people you targeted were old and sick, because the law adds weight for exactly that. He had built an empire on the belief that everyone weaker than him was food. He came out of his office to eat the biggest, weakest-looking thing he had ever seen. It turned out to be the hook. The desk closed for good. Curtis Vane sat in a courtroom and was, for once, a man without a script. His promises were read back to him in his own warm voice, dear and legacy and once in a lifetime. And there is nothing in the world that sounds worse than your own kindness played back when everyone in the room knows it was a knife. He had remembered exactly how Ray took his coffee. Black, 1 sugar. He could not, when it counted, produce a single client's real name. The coffee, it came out, had been bought on the company card. Everything Curtis ever gave my husband, he had been reimbursed for, down to the cup. And Diane. When they asked me about Diane, I told them the truth. All of it. That she was lower than the rest. That she was afraid. That once, near the end, an envelope came to my house with a page in it that was never supposed to leave that office. And that without that page, some of what came next would have been a great deal harder. I told them a person can be made into a tool, hollowed out and filled with someone else's words, and that climbing back out of that is its own long road, and I had no interest in standing in hers. She cooperated. She got a different ending than the men did. That was the one mercy I had to give, and I gave it on purpose, and I gave it because she had earned at least that much in a single brave trip to a mailbox. My husband was a warm man. Somewhere in all that cold, I wanted one warm thing to survive. He'd have wanted that. I did it for him. There's a part I didn't expect, and it's the part I hold on to now. When the investigators went through West Haven's list, the list of people they had marked as easy, they found names. A lot of names. Other folders on other nightstands. Other frightened people who had been sold air. My ledger, the real one, the one I kept the whole time I was pretending to be foolish, became a map. It helped them reach people who didn't even know yet what had been done to them, and warn the ones the desk hadn't gotten to. The months I spent being their best customer didn't just close those months of crimes. They reached backward and forward and pulled strangers out of the water. My grief, kept carefully, in columns, turned out to be good for something. It turned out to be a very thorough file. I put Ray's folder away, finally. I took out every fake statement and left them with the people who needed them, and I kept just one thing in it. His note. For Maggie, so you're never afraid about money. I put the folder back on his nightstand with only his note inside, and that is where it is now. The house is paid off. I am not rich, but the savings came back, and I am not afraid about money, which is the exact thing he wanted for me. In the end, He just tried to give it to me through a stranger's lie, and I had to go earn it through the truth. We got to the same place. We always did. He warm, me careful, the two of us arriving together. 44 years of that. Why would the last time be any different? People ask me how I could sit there for months, smiling into the phone at the men who did this. They think it must have taken hate. It didn't. Hate is hot and sloppy, and it makes mistakes. What it took was the other thing. They believed grief had made me easy, and they were wrong about what grief is. Grief in a careful person is just love with nowhere left to go. And love will sit very still and keep very good records and wait an entire season for the right 10 o'clock on the right Tuesday morning. So let me ask you, because I have wondered what other people would have done. If you had found that folder on your husband's nightstand, with his shaky handwriting in the back of it, would you have called the police that same afternoon and let it become a file in a drawer? Or would you have done what I did, gone back inside, become their best customer, and chosen the day yourself? Tell me below. And when you tell me how old you are. I have a feeling about who understands this story best, and I'd like to know if I'm right. One more thing, before I go. While the investigators were going through West Haven's list, one name in it kept turning up in their other files, too. A retired schoolteacher, a few towns over. She hadn't been taken by a company with a leather folder. She'd gotten a phone call, an ordinary afternoon, from what sounded exactly like the fraud department of her own bank. The real one. The number on her caller ID matched the number printed on the back of her own debit card. And the calm, helpful man on the line, before she had told him a single thing, already knew her balance. To the penny. What he told her to do next, to keep her money safe, is the reason she very nearly lost all of it. But that's a story for next time.